This is a result of the way that segregation is taught. Segregation is taught in schools as white people just didn't like to be around black people. But that was not the aim of segregation. The aim of segregation was to block black people from material resources.
Yes.
If you don't believe that, please take into consideration the fact that when segregation ended, that is the beginning of this fight against public everything.
Yep.
That is the beginning of the fight against public schools. They started closing public pools. The fight on all of these publicly accessible resources started the second that black people had access to them, because segregation functioned to keep black people from that. For as long as black people have been in this country, they have been fighting for their freedom. And for as long as they've been fighting for their freedom, they have been thwarted by white supremacy. Every effort that they've made, there is a counterattack, right? The Great Migration, you see in the film, they talk about how like it's the same up there, right? They don't call it Jim Crow, but it's the same. We're being treated the same. There was this myth about the North and it's not true. Crazy Stupid Podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time watching, we'd love it if you could hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell so that you are aware of when we post things.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. My name is Esther.
And I'm Adrian.
And today we're here to talk about Sinners.
This will be our spoiler review. So if you have not seen Sinners, you can either go watch the movie, which we're encouraging you to do so, or you could watch our spoiler-free review if you don't want anything ruined for you in that regard.
I, too, was very emotional the second watch.
Yes, okay.
The first time I was emotional also.
But something's different.
But the second time, I don't know why.
It is a different experience because you can pay attention more to the emotional beats than trying to figure out where all of this is going.
Yeah, that's true. There's the suspense part of it is gone. So you can,
I think one of the beautiful things, and you mentioned this when we were doing our non-spoiler review, but one of the beautiful things that Ryan Coogler was able to do in Sinners was to recognize the value in an individual, as in this instance, like a black individual's own spiritual journey and what that can look like for any and every person. And while he provides some criticisms overall, he's not demonizing any group. He's not saying this faith practice is right, this faith practice is wrong. He's just simply saying in each of these characters throughout the film, what they rely on is their own interpretation of a faith that they need in that moment. So we have Sammie, who I feel like is sort of like the main character. There's some rigid fundamentalist aspects to it, right? You have his father who's trying to make sure that he, forgets everything, that he finds pleasure, that he finds satisfaction. I almost want to say like the color grading for his dad when we're first introduced to him, I also think was a little intentional. Like you're sort of seeing it from Sammie's perspective. Like his dad has dark skin, but I don't think how it was hard to make out his facial expressions and you could only sort of see his mouth and eyes. I think that was Coogler's way of sort of showing us as like, there's a terror that Sammie sort of feels when it comes to that faith. Because later on, the color grading for his father is completely different. You see the features in his face a lot more, but you're introduced to this world through the lens of Sammie and perhaps how he sees this faith practice. But it's important to note, he does not abandon that faith.
Yeah, you need the very last credit scene to get that.
When he's singing the song, but also when his father is saying, regret this music, and he's saying, regret it from your heart, from your voice and your soul. And Ryan Coogler is showing different images. Like when the dad says your heart, we see Pearline, like the girl that Sammie's falling for. When his dad says your voice, the camera goes to Slim playing. And when he says his soul, it's Sammie singing in the church. So he's never given up that faith. He just has a different version of what that looks like. And we know that he hasn't given up on that faith because when he's confronted with the main vampire, he starts to say, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. In Andy's instance, there is no demonizing of that, which is something that does happen, especially from a lot of Christians, of like, it's demonic, there's this voodoo aspect, and it seems to sometimes be heavily more focused on demonizing Black spiritual practices more than any other faith group. So the fact that she was in there, I really appreciated it, because without her in that film, they would have lost even worse. Sammie doesn't get away. They don't figure out what these creatures are. They don't figure out how to defeat them. Smoke probably, I don't think it was just like, loosey-goosey. I do think her practices kept him safe. Then the last bit was the main vampire, Remmick. I'm assuming he's somewhere in Ireland. And he talks about how that Bible verse was used from a book that was forced upon my people. But then he says, despite all of that, it still somehow brought me comfort in moments. So all of that, I just think Ryan Coogler did such a good job of showing that, like, what you need in your own spiritual journey is something that's going to be unique to you. And that does not mean one is going to be more valuable than the other. So I just walked away just loving that so much, because I feel like a lot of us went through that. Like, the faith that our parents had looks different than the way that we have it. And the idea of, like, if you have this talent, like in Sammie's case, you have to use your talents for the church. You have to use your singing, your public speaking ability, your organizing ability. It has to be catered on the church. Like, I do feel like I picked some of my majors that I did primarily because it was like, well, what else could I use it for if not for using it for the church? There was no realm of possibility outside of that. So that just really spoke to me, Sammie's character, so much when he chose to not let it go. And I broke down when you see him clutching on to the remnants of that guitar. It just meant a lot to me.
Yeah, I think something else that's really important too in this conversation is that so much of that type of Black Christianity is a result of white supremacy, not just in the lens of, like, it's the way that the religion was presented to enslaved people through white supremacy, but also because that fear, like the fear that we see Sammie's dad have, it's a fear based on real threat, right? Like there is real and present danger, and a lot of the fear-based tendencies in Black Christianity that are very strict about how Black people present themselves and how Black people express themselves. A lot of that comes from a fear of the backlash that you would face from white people if you stepped too far outside of the lines of what they deemed normal and respectable for Black people. It's worth noting that too, that like some of that harm, it was rooted in a genuine desire to keep people safe from very real dangers. But yes, I really like that. I did not even pick up on who they were flashing to.
It broke my heart
in those moments, but that's such a good note. I was picking up on that same thing too that you were saying, though, that like he's not saying any of it is right or wrong. I think really the film is showing like all of it is sacred because all of it is what a group of people created in circumstances unimaginable to most people today. Yes. These are all things that people were able to either hold on to and retain and reserve over decades and decades of separation from its source, right? Like root magic is that. They talk about in the movie how blues music is that, but also gospel music is also that. Like they have echoes of where Black people came from originally, right? There's pieces of what people were able to retain even when they were stripped away from everything that they knew and put into places where they were completely disconnected from their original home, right? So like all of it is sacred for that reason. It was a means of survival for all of these people, decades and decades and decades and generations of people in unimaginable circumstances clung to these pieces of their culture as a means to survive. Like they understood that this is what we have and this is what we can control and create and this is what keeps us going. Yeah. And it's why we are here in all of our varied forms. Yeah. I really, really liked the way that he centered music specifically. The film is definitely talking about music as like a means of escapism, as a means of survival. Yes. Definitely in that scene. I actually think though that the first time that they bring that across is on the drive. Yep. And Slim tells that tragic story. After he tells that story of what happened to his friend and the lynching, and he immediately starts to sing and he immediately starts to hum, and you see Sammie in the back just kind of like sitting with what he was told. And then Stack is like, come on, man, you got your guitar, let's play. So like they immediately are introducing this idea of like music as healing, music as like a way that Black people found a way to express things and horrors and realities that were beyond words and beyond comprehension and put it into music. I mean, the history that Black Americans have with music, I mean, music was part of the doggone Underground Railroad. Like we sing songs today in churches that they literally sung on plantations to signal things that were coming to keep people safe, that they sung on their way to running for freedom, right? To signal people ahead of them or behind them or whatever of dangers coming. Like, music is so integral to our experience here. And all of its different forms. And I love that scene. I love that scene of the juke joint because it's all of these different types of music, and it's saying like all of this is just as valid and sacred as all of the rest of it, right? Yeah. Like, and that's important. That's important for everybody. I think both within the Black community and outside of the Black community, there is a tendency to degrade certain types of, I think, especially Black American expression. As less than, as ghetto. Other Black people in the diaspora do this too. And I think that his inclusion of all of this,
more modern music,
of the girl twerking side by side with the other woman who were actually in the juke joint there dancing alongside them, of the DJing, of all of it side by side, showing like all of this is an equal part of our expression as people and a sacred part of our history, I think was so powerful and so necessary.
Yeah. What I also loved, and this is, I think I failed to express it when we first got out of theater the first time, but what I loved what Coogler did is to use Slim in the juke joint to help us understand what the presence of music means for not just Black people, but for people in general, and how it can tie you to your heritage, to your culture. Because he has that line where he says, and in this moment, we're linked to our ancestors. And, then Annie goes on and says that and it's a way where we can sort of visit the future and visit the past, right? And to tie back into what you were saying about the longevity and the connection that we have with still singing some of these Negro spirituals, I think it's also metaphorically tied into what I think Coogler was trying to get across. There is it's hard to not use the word spiritual, but there is a connection that is tying all of these lineages together, and music is doing it. The fact that we are singing the same songs that slaves were singing to escape is a connection there. The fact that some of the lyrics that they had was to speak their liberation into existence is a connection that we're living through now. The lyrics, I mean, you read through some of the lyrics that the Black National Anthem has, and you really sit with that. There is a pain that I feel when I sing it that I don't feel when I sing anything else. It's hard to not use the word spiritual when trying to describe it, because it's something that does feel otherworldly. And I think what Coogler was able to do in Sinners, in tying the past, future, present together, I think it helped me make sense out of what I was feeling, but I didn't have the words to describe it throughout my entire existence. And I think that's why when I watched it the second time, I just kind of broke down into tears. Even as the juke joint experience was going on and the roof gets on fire. I mean, that ties into the roof is on fire hip hop track, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So all of it is just tied into the experience. But I think it's also important to note, I love that he is not trying to make it exclusively for Black people, because as the music was going on, the Asian family, they saw their ancestors too. But even with Remmick, the main vampire, he gets his Irish accent back when he starts to sing, right? And so recognizing how music has continuously tied us to our ancestry and how it ties us to our present and to our future, I think is the best way to describe the feeling any of us have when we're singing a song that is made from our culture, that was birthed out of struggle, that was birthed out of the pursuit of something more. And I just love that.
I guess we should start talking about the vampires and how vampirism is kind of functioning in this story and in this film. I had an expectation going into this film. I thought it was like white vampires going after black people. And like it kind of was, but it also kind of was not. There's a couple things that I noticed. Number one, the thing that attracts the vampires to them is their joy. He even says this later in the film that, you know, the ability that Miles has is something that he wants for himself, right? Like it's a way that he can try to reconnect with his own people that he hasn't seen in a long time. I haven't seen a ton of conversation about the film, but I think that like from what I have seen, there's like some very, I think, simplistic readings of the film. Like I've seen people talk about like Mary's character, and they're like, you see, this is what happens when you let a white this is what happens when you let a white woman into the culture.
Dr. Umar Johnson vibes.
This is what happens. And I don't think that is
That's not what they're going for.
I personally do not think that was Coogler's goal with this.
Yeah.
I think that I don't think the vampires themselves represented whiteness or white supremacy. The main reason why I don't think that is because after we beat the vampires, we go and we beat the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes.
So like the two things are clearly separate thematically in the film. So I was really trying to think, what is it? I think what I've landed on is, I think vampires, there's a lust with vampires, and there's also like, it's this uncontrollable pursuit of your own selfish desires, right? And you see that in this film. As soon as they turn, they have a need to go after everybody else to bring them in, even though it's to those people's detriment, right? They immediately are like, we have to go after the thing that we want, even to the detriment and the harm of other people. And throughout the film, they're using all these terms to try to convince them, right? They're trying to say, like, I wrote it down. Remmick said, this world already left you for dead. It won't let you build. It won't let you fellowship. Like trying to appease them and get them to buy into his idea of what freedom is. And I think that what that was getting at for me is that, like, I think that there are real temptations in the world for Black people, but I think for all people, that ask them to abandon efforts to build something up and build something out, you know, with you and other people in pursuit of freedom, and to instead go for something that is more destructive and more selfish in nature in order to feel a semblance of freedom just for yourself. Yeah. And it's really tempting because it can feel easier. It can feel like it's right there. And I feel like the film is kind of landing on like, even that is empty. It's not real. It's not true. It won't give you what you're really looking for. That's kind of how I was reading them.
Because even in the end, when Stack and Mary talk to Sammie, I mean, Stack pretty much says that was the last time we felt free. It was the last time I saw my brother. It was the last time that I felt the sunrise. So he, in that moment, thought, well, he didn't have that much of a choice, but the appeal that he's making to Stack and the rest of them is this idea of like, you're gaining something. But when he reflects in that moment with Sammie, he's realizing how much I ended up losing a lot. Like I lost a lot. I lost my brother. The sunrise, like that's, you know, human history. It's like a new day, a new start. There's something refreshing about it. He lost that opportunity.
And you juxtapose that with the ending for Smoke.
Yeah.
And he doesn't live, but we know that he is free.
Yes.
And we know that he is fulfilled and content. Right? Like it's just such a stark difference. And I think it's making the message really clear.
Yeah. To carry on with your point about it not just being a Black versus white conversation, I think they did a good job with Remmick's character. As we mentioned earlier, when he's talking with Sammie and Sammie's reciting, you know, the Bible verse, the Lord Shepherd, and Remmick chimes in and was like, he starts saying it with him, and he talks about how that verse that has that book that has that verse was pushed on my people and our culture. But even to this day, I find value in it. But there's also this connection of like when he starts to engage in music, that country accent goes to an Irish one. One of the things that I was really thinking about, what I found Remmick's character so fascinating, was how he was essentially showing that like the idea of white supremacy has not just hurt people of color around the world, like it has also hurt white people as well, because like the colonization that was pushed onto them hurt them of their culture also. It forced a religion onto them also. And the fact that he was able to sort of find himself when they're engaging in that music, I think shows that there are still similar struggles that we have across the board, across racial lines, because of white supremacy has been existing. We wouldn't learn that much about him if music wasn't playing such a big role in the story, you know, because what we see here in this moment is like Remmick is trying to get back to something. He's trying to get back to his people. He's trying to get back to his culture, because he recognizes my whiteness isn't my culture. Right. The same way how when we're listening to when the black people are listening to the juke joint, they're connecting back to their African heritage. Remmick's connecting back to his Irish one. Right. And there's value in reclaiming that. There's value in, and I would say a more healthier identity in tying it back to that ancestry than to tying it to whiteness.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It was definitely an intentional choice to have Remmick be Irish of all the myriads of white people.
Well, for sure, especially with the history that they've had, you know, with the UK and everything. Yeah, I do want to just take a moment to just talk about how important Annie is and why I feel like she's like the MVP of this movie. I just kind of want to reiterate it, even though we've sort of said a little bit of like the spiritual practices that she has are often demonized. They're often shunned away. And coming from someone that grew up in the black church, that grew up as a Christian, those things I was taught to be terrified of. Those were things that I was taught to stay away from. Those were the things that I was taught to, like, if any artist that engaged in them, even in the most simplistic version, I was told to not listen to those artists anymore. There's a complete erasure that comes with it. And I love the fact that Coogler is trying to, in some ways, you know, maybe not teach us to reclaim it holistically, but to normalize it and showing that like this isn't something that you need to be terrified of. Even if this is not something that you feel like is needed in your spiritual journey, there can still be value in a lot of these practices. And we see in the fact that like she kind of almost like essentially saved Sammie's life.
I would agree. This isn't a huge thing, but I think that we're not making a big enough deal. Okay, this is going to be like slight tangent comeback. This is all I'll say. When this last season of Bridgerton came on, I promise this ties back.
You're fine.
When this last season of Bridgerton aired, people could not shut up about the fact that it was a plus size woman being like the love interest in this season. And it was valid and deserved, right? Like that's a big deal. It shouldn't be a big deal, but it was a big deal, right? Like people were like, look at this revolutionary thing. Agree. Now, Sinners, we had a sex scene with a dark-skinned plus size black woman.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think I've ever seen that. I was really trying to think, and I don't think I have. I think that just like a quick aside, like Ryan Coogler always does right by black women in his movies, and he always does right by the dark-skinned black women in his movies, which is a big deal. And to have Annie's character be the object of a man's sexual desire is a big deal, because Annie's character at any other point, be like in the past, like literally 50, 70 years, would have been a mammy.
Yep.
Simply because of the look and the build of the actress portraying her. So that was important, and I appreciate it.
Or the one to provide spiritual guidance and comfort, but never the one that's given that much plot or story arc, or you don't learn that much about her. Like there's no development of her character. I also would say like her death, that wasn't like a fridging moment also, as in like a female character is unalive for the purpose of moving the plot forward and developing a man's character. I think Annie into like they're just connected. Their story arc is tied through their daughter. And that's where I just felt like it was necessary. And just I enjoyed it because she's an incredible actor, by the way.
She did a wonderful job.
Yeah.
I do think real quick, just talking about Mary's character just a little bit, because people are interpreting her character as a white woman. Now, today, yeah, obviously, like Haley Steinfeld is white, okay? However, in 1932, the one drop rule was very much alive and well. What the film does a very good job of portraying is that she is only white as long as she can maintain her distance from other Black people. That's why throughout the movie, they're like, girl, you got to get out of here, because if they see you over here, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Because she has essentially started passing. She's married a white man and she lives in Arkansas or somewhere, I think. I can't remember. And she's left all of this behind her as a means of survival. So I just think, I don't know, just like a little bit more nuance with like her character and her relation to the other Black characters in the movie. I also think this just needs to be a reminder to the Black community that this whole conversation about biracial people not being Black, brand new.
It is. Yeah.
Brand new. And if you were to go back and tell your grandparents and your great grandparents that this is what you're doing, they would be confused. Because as you see in this film, she's not even biracial. Her grandfather was half Black. And still, she grew up amongst these Black people because the white people there knew of her history.
Yeah.
So she could not fully immerse herself in whiteness because they wouldn't let her unless she could abandon all of it. So this whole conversation that we're having right now about like, are all four of your grandparents Black and all, it's brand new and I don't think it's worth it. The last thing I really wanted to say, and I kind of started talking about this in the spoiler-free review, but I just really have to, I got to lean in on it a little bit more. Before I even start, I just want to say white supremacy, colonialism, imperialism, slavery, they have all had unique impacts on different groups of marginalized people. I am not saying that Black American people are like uniquely impacted by those things in a way that like it's worse than. I'm not saying that. I'm not an Oppression Olympics person. Every group of people has a way that they were impacted uniquely that's different from other groups of people. I'm about to talk about Black American people though. One of the things that is unique to the Black American experience specifically in the wake of slavery is other groups of Black people who were enslaved eventually were given ownership of the land on which they were enslaved. That was not the experience for Black American people. And so there has always been this tension between like us being here in America and us being Americans and us also being Black. It comes from lots of different directions, right? On the one hand, other Black people in the diaspora often have a very difficult time understanding the attachment that Black Americans have to America. They often try to discredit it, to question it, to call it problematic, or to claim that it's a source of ignorance. And then also on the flip side, you have white people who are really struggling to reconcile with the fact that when they brought Black people to America to be their free labor, what they did is they inherently ceded over their sole ownership of America and its story and its history. Yeah. And so we are now innately tied and a part of it. And they just cannot reconcile that reality. What Ryan Coogler did in this film was so deeply appreciated to me because he's talking about a point in history that we don't often talk about that is post-slavery, but it still doesn't feel modern day. Everything that we see on display in the film, all these aspects of Black American culture in the 1930s, is a result of centuries worth of our presence here building these things up. And so the film itself is a testament to our longevity here and how long we've been here and how much of this place we own and have a right to claim. And it's also a testament, I think, to the recency of all of these horrors that we talk about all the time. This movie is set in 1932. We are seeing Black people in this film picking cotton. My grandparents were born in 1926 and 1927. We graze up against that history every single day. And that's also unique to Black American people because slavery lasted the longest in America. And so I just think, I just so often feel that Black American identity just needs to be discussed with so much more respect and so much more reverence. I just think that people don't often pause to recognize the pain that we literally touch every single day through people that we know who raised us and how hard we have worked to plant our seeds here.
Yeah.
And we deserve to own this place and own our relationship to it however we want. And you can feel uncomfortable with it if you want to, but you don't get to speak on it if you're not living that experience.
Thank you for sharing that. You brought up something, and I don't know if it'll be too much of a pivot, but it sort of ties to just a conversation that I have seen a little bit, almost like a romanticizing of segregation by Black people. Underneath it all, I understand the sentiment that like we had our own, we were a lot more communal in some aspects. I think what people are missing is how much class was tied to racism and still is. Because a lot of these Black people were living in poverty. It was not like, I think it might have been Garrison, one of our friends, made that video where he talks about the unemployment rate, where he mentioned like the poverty rate and how that shifted after a lot of these laws were passed. And I feel like that has gotten lost in history by some Black people.
Yes.
Shit wasn't that great the way that you guys are making it. I think there are things that culturally maybe we've lost sight on how valuable that was. And I can understand that feeling. But there is also this reality of like trying to go back when segregation existed is to also release any form of agency and power that our ancestors fought to have. The spaces that we now have access to, as limited as they are, we're not keeping that if we are segregated again. Those are gone too. Like Ruby Bridges and her parents, they were not sending her to these schools because they're just trying to end segregation. No, there was a feeling of access to something that they felt was lacking. And I feel like that was just kind of, it's just a little bit necessary to just remind people to not romanticize how economically displaced a lot of our ancestors were during that time, but to also recognize overwhelming sense of violence that they were having to sit with all the time.
This is a result of the way that segregation is taught. Segregation is taught in schools as, oh, well, white people just thought they didn't like to be around Black people. Like they didn't want to share spaces with them. And so that's why they created segregation. But that was not the aim of segregation. The aim of segregation was to block Black people from material resources.
Yes.
Think about this. If you just do a second of thinking, it doesn't make any sense. Black people were cleaning white people's homes. Black people were cooking white people's food. Black people were raising white people's children. This was not about separation. It was simply about making sure that Black people could not have access to the same quality of life as white people. That was the entire aim of segregation. And so the idea that going back to it, or that there is somehow this golden era of like Black owned everything and Black community and Black, the function of it was to keep us from prosperity. That was it. And if you don't believe that, please take into consideration the fact that when segregation ended, that is the beginning of this fight against public everything. That is the beginning of the fight against public schools. They started closing public pools. The fight on all of these publicly accessible resources started the second that Black people had access to them, because segregation functioned to keep Black people from that. It's not the answer.
Only like a couple of things that I just wanted to know, like the indigenous people in that story. The indigenous people in that story, they seem to have the most understanding of the vampires, which I think would make sense because they've just been in America the longest. So they know all of that, the culture that's there. I do also with the idea that like, all right, you is on your own.
We tried.
and I empathize with what they have gone through as a people, as in we have given ourselves away enough. The self-preservation, I understand that's explicitly for indigenous people in some context because of what they've endured. So I know some people brought up like maybe it was like a minor plot hole that they weren't brought back at some point. I don't mind it personally. Some of the things that I really liked. One, when Sammie's in the car and they're driving for the first time earlier in the movie, and he's asking if he can drive the car because he's like, oh, it goes super fast.
Oh, he does drive it back.
Tragically, in the end, he does drive it, just not under the circumstances that he would like. I also want to. We didn't mention this in our spoiler-free review, but somebody made the point in our comment section, so thank you for bringing that up. Ruth Carter, she's the woman that is always tied with Coogler that helps with the costume design.
Yeah. Oh, we went to her exhibit for yes. Oh yeah.
Listen, she gonna win another Oscar. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, the costume
he will win another Oscar. Okay,
solid. It was
another
solid.
one, and also look like he's gonna win another Oscar. I would be shocked if he does not win another Oscar because of the sound mixing he did with that ensemble scene in the juke joint.
Yeah, it will be surprising.
I have never heard anything like that ever. Overall, I mean, watching it a second time, no notes. I still think this movie is flawless. I think we'll be talking about this movie for decades on end. So we would love to hear your all's thoughts. Please let us know in the comment sections below the feelings that you have, the thoughts that you have, maybe things that we missed, things we didn't pick up on. So let us know in the comment section below about what you thought. We're looking forward to engaging in those conversations with you all. With that, we will see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace.